So last week I started reading a book. It's called Thank God for Atheists. And it's written by a guy named Timothy Morgan, which weirdly enough is the name of the guy who was the fire chief at Twinsburg who recruited me to be chaplain. So I need to send him a picture of this and be like, I love your book, man. And then he'll punch me in the face. And so it's by a guy named Tim Morgan. It's very witty. The book is very witty. Extremely well-read and intelligent author. Very respectful to people who he disagrees with. And he says going into it, that will be the tone of this book. I'm not trying to slam anybody or be a jerk. But the first chapter is really his story. And his story is very interesting. He was raised in the church. Church kid, brought to church all the time by his family, which is a great thing. He was raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My wife, Shannon, she lived in Crowley, Louisiana for a time. And middle school, part of middle school and high school. And she's a little bit of a snob about the way I pronounce names of places in Louisiana. And sometimes she will just break into full accent for just one word or a name. And so she'll be like, yeah, when I was a kid, I lived for a little while in Crowley, Louisiana. It's not too far from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm like, what just happened right there? And she convulses, falls on the ground, and gets rigid. And I think it's just momentary demon possession for just a second. So anyways, so just for my wife's sake, this guy lived with his family in Baton Rouge. And he said, hey, they were great people in Louisiana. He said they would give you the shirt off their backs, but I felt like I was trapped in an endless episode of Duck Dynasty. That was how he described growing up. And he went to college, and that was really when he was trying to make his faith his own. And he began to read books by Christian apologists, which are people who defend the Christian faith, try to show you like the logic of theism and, you know, the historical accuracy of the scriptures and textual criticism. And, you know, here are things, artifacts found from the Old Testament that's talked about, you know, just things that help you reason out your faith. So he started reading books by Christian apologists who helped him become a theist and eventually helped him to want to follow Jesus and have his own faith. And so he felt like during college that God was calling him to become a pastor. And bless his soul. And so, therefore, he went to seminary for post-grad. And after seminary, he became an associate pastor at a church in Florida. And he's this young, you know, he's fired up, he's got ideas, he wants to serve in the community and show the love of Jesus to people, be good news, speak good news. And his church was like, whoa, dude, slow your roll. They kind of wanted to do what they were doing. And he's a young guy. He's like, I got new ideas, though. Here's some things we can do to get out there and to serve and to be Jesus in our community. And so eventually, he was fired for insubordination because it just kind of seemed like he was, to them, butting heads with the vision of the lead pastor. And he was like, I didn't feel like we were butting heads at all. I just had new ideas. And so he was fired. And basically, Tim Morgan says in this book, that was strike one for God. And so he went on then to be a part of a church plant, which is starting a new church, not a new belief system, just a new congregation. And he moved all the way to California. And they made an agreement about how much he would be paid on staff at this church as one of the staff members. He wouldn't be the lead guy. He was going to be one of the staff members. But when he got out there, it turned out that things weren't as they wanted it to be. Some of the support hadn't come through that they promised. They couldn't pay him what they thought they would. And so he was living on very little, and the church was really struggling. And in the midst of that, he met a girl who was a part of this church plant. Her name was Christelle. She's such a godly girl. The name Christ is in her name. It's like Christ L. So Christelle. And he was like, man, she loves Jesus. We both want to be in full-time vocational service. And we just, our vision, our values are so aligned. And he said to God, God, I don't mind that I'm broke. I don't mind that the church is struggling. If I would have someone like this with me, then I wouldn't have to go through all that struggle alone. And so he prayed that God would give him a Christian girl like Christelle or someone else. And so that really wasn't in the mix. Like, not only was Christelle not interested in him, she just wasn't interested in dating at all. And she basically just said she was content for it to be just her and Jesus. And Tim struggled with that. He was like, man, I knew Jesus loved her and all. He said, but I also knew Jesus had no plans of marrying her. And I thought it pretty rude if Jesus was going to stand in the way of anyone else being able to date Christelle. And that kind of put a pebble in my shoe. He was like, man, so it was just another unanswered prayer. And he was like, hey, strike two, God. He was like, okay, that's another one. And so then the church continued to struggle. He's working 80 hours a week. The church attendance peaked at 30. And it's just really struck. He got robbed twice in his first year. California, you know. And so 2 years of struggle, the church did not become self-supporting, and they shut it down. And he was like, then I had to do like the one thing I could do to use my skills to make money, and that was he became a flight instructor. And he was like, the failure of that church was then, okay, God, strike three, and he gave up on God. And he said, he writes this, that decade of disappointment, so that was 10 years total, that decade of disappointment opened my mind to atheism. It offered an escape, an out from a belief system that I'd found to be nothing but problematic. I picked up atheist authors like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Bertrand Russell, Friedrich Nietzsche for the first time, and Morgan said, I wanted to embrace atheism. So the questions we're asking today are things like, in our series going through the Gospel of Mark, how does Jesus respond to doubt? How does Jesus respond to unbelief? How does he treat people who want to believe but then start struggling or have doubts? How does Jesus respond? And we come to this in Mark chapter 9, as Lauren just read. So we've been going through the Gospel of Mark, and we've hit kind of a major point in the very middle of it in Mark 8. Now we're moving back into some just normal narratives after we've hit kind of a peak episode in the middle. And last week we talked about how there was this mountaintop experience where Jesus took 3 of his main 12 disciples up to the top of a mountain, James, Peter, and John. And this is literally might be where we get the phrase mountaintop experience from, is from last week's story. Now they're coming down from the mountain to join the other 9 disciples that have been down waiting at the bottom of the mountain. And there's this scene that unfolds, and it's a very memorable story. And honestly, this isn't just preacher speak. I think this might be one of the most important dialogues in all of the Bible. It's just great. And so in Mark 9, summarizing the beginning, Jesus comes down with the 3. They're meeting up with the 9. This large crowd is gathered, and the teachers of the law are there arguing with the 9 disciples. Teachers of the law are the religious, respected leaders who know the scriptures really well. Typically, most of them were very religious but very unspiritual, and Jesus was constantly butting heads with them. Well, now they're arguing with the 9 disciples about something, and so this big crowd is gathered, and that's what Jesus and the 3 are coming down to, and everyone's got their cell phones out, and they're filming what's going on or whatever. It's like a high school fight. Everybody's got it, and Jesus comes down, he's like, hey, what, to the 9, what are you arguing with them about? Like, what's going on down here? And this is where we pick up in verse 17. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples, the 9, to drive out the spirit, but they could not. Very important. They failed. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Now, pause right there. Oh, here we have it. This is it. How does the real Jesus respond to unbelief and doubt? He's going for the jugular right here. You unbelieving generation. Well, wait a minute. Hold on. That could be said. That might apply to him speaking to just the disciples. It could be he's speaking to the boy's father. Could be he's speaking to the whole crowd. Could be he's speaking to the teachers of the law. We don't know who that's directed at when he says that. My theory is it's directed to the disciples. They're the only ones in the story who have shown any type of unbelief. In fact, right before he says that, the guy said, I brought him, my son, to your disciples, and they weren't able to do anything about it. And then he says, you unbelieving generation. Now, Jesus did not hold back when he talked to his disciples about their lack of belief, their lack of faith. He was often frustrated with them at times where they should have shown some kind of faith, and they failed. And so that's my theory on who he's talking about right there. So let's see how this plays out. Verse 20. They brought him, the son. When the spirit inside of the boy saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Now, naturally, Jesus was overwhelmed with compassion for this boy. And in verse 21, Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him, which we see throughout Scripture as the MO of Satan and his minions. They are all about put you in self-destruct mode. Whether you are possessed by a demon or tempted by a demon or just being whispered to by a demon, the point is Satan wants you destroyed, period. And so it's often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Hold up, stop the press. Did he just say to Jesus, if you can do anything? Like that's what? Did dude just say, if you can, to Jesus? But understand, his world is swirling right now. He brought the boy to Jesus. All that was available was the 9 disciples, and they failed him. So he's reeling right now. His faith is badly shaken, and I would have loved to have seen Jesus' face or heard his tone. This is one of those, I don't just want the Chosen TV series. I want to know how Jesus responded himself. Well, how did he respond? And he fixes on the Father's if clause, and in verse 23 says, if you can, Jesus said, everything is possible for one who believes. And so one of the things that Mark emphasizes in his gospel is the importance of faith in healing. It comes up over and over and over. For Jesus to heal you, you have to demonstrate faith. Now, in this case, the boy must not have been capable of faith because of his condition. So it's going to take faith from the Father on behalf of the Son, and it's going to take faith. So the actual question isn't whether Jesus has the power to heal the boy. It's whether the Father has faith to believe that Jesus can heal his son. Verse 20, immediately the boy's father exclaimed, kind of like realizing what he said and that Jesus picked up on it, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. And this is a statement that has resonated with people of faith for centuries. So if it isn't already highlighted in a Bible app or a paperback Bible, there should be so much movement in the room right now. Because preacher's watching. The preacher's watching, okay? And so underline, highlight this verse. If you haven't already, I'll wait. No, I'm just kidding. But this is such an important verse, and it gives so much hope to people like us today in 2025. So notice, the disciples, the 9, they're trying to exorcise a demon. But do you know what the last verse of this story tells us that Lauren read, verse 29? The reason they aren't able to exorcise the demon is because they're trying without praying. Like that's Jesus, what he says, this kind can only come out through prayer. The disciples were doing this without prayer? Okay, well that seems kind of arrogant and clueless. Like how are they don't understand that they're inadequate to deal with the evil and the difficulties of this real, fallen, broken world. So they don't have the strength or the power to deal with evil and life's difficulties. Then in verse 14, you've got the teachers of the law who are arguing with the disciples. They're probably pontificating, probably telling the disciples what they're doing wrong. And there's only one figure in this whole story, in this whole scene, that is acknowledging weakness, and that is the boy's father. There's only one person who is acknowledging weakness. That's verse 24. The father says, help me. He says those words to Jesus. Help me. Like I am in a position of need. I need help, and I believe that you have the ability to help me, but help me overcome my unbelief. This is a very good news point to begin with right here, and that is helplessness, not holiness, is the first step to accessing the presence and the power of the real Jesus. It begins with not, okay, God, I got things cleaned up. I'm a good person. Why shouldn't you bless me? It begins with, I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. I don't have the strength to face my difficulties. I don't have strength over evil. Help me, Jesus. I need your help. That's a spiritual truth. It's an AA principle. It's Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step wisdom. This is the kind of humility that leads to life change. I can't. Jesus, I need you. Help me. And it's funny that Jesus doesn't say, and here's kind of our response of Jesus to doubt, is Jesus doesn't say, dude, I am the freaking glory of God in the flesh. You go to your room, spend some time thinking about this, deal with your doubts, then you come back to me when you're ready, when you've got some kind of faith. That isn't how Jesus responds to him at all. He doesn't respond that way. The Father acknowledges he doesn't have what it takes to handle the suffering, difficulties, struggles and that are confronting him. and he pleads for help just as he is a doubter. And he says, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Now, honing in on that sentence, man, I do believe, but basically he's saying, I do believe, but I'm not certain of it. I do believe, but I'm not certain. And I mean, that's such brutal honesty. And he recognizes that his faith is far from perfect. His faith is mixed with some unbelief, with some doubt, with some discouragement, which is important. And it's an incredible display of honesty. And he asks Jesus for help. And you look at this, and it looks like a contradiction, doesn't it? In the same sentence, you've got belief and unbelief. But it's not a contradiction at all. This is life. This is life, absolutely. And it's a valuable lesson that we have to learn from this, is that faith is a checkerboard of belief and doubt. It is just a checkerboard of both of those things. Faith is never perfect, and everyone doubts. If you don't doubt, you are a liar. Either that or you are self-deceived. You don't understand the ways that you have a lack of faith. And so faith is a checkerboard of belief and doubt. Doubt isn't just something experienced by people out there, by the unbelievers, by the outsiders, the unchurched, the spiritually weak. Doubt happens. That should be a bumper sticker. Doubt happens. It happens. And belief and unbelief are always mixed together. Everyone has imperfect faith. And so this has been a reason that I've always been passionate about wanting to start a church, not because there aren't other good churches, but wanting to start another church that just acknowledges this is a safe place for people. Doubters are welcome here because so many people have had things happen in their lives or aren't sure about Jesus or had some time growing up in church, but then were out of church for a while and are thinking about coming back. There's all this mixture of backstories that I've always just been like, man, there are so many people who aren't convinced, who I would love to be a part of our church and have an opportunity to learn about Jesus, ask questions about Jesus, and search. And one of the great things about Jesus' church and the way that I think Jesus intended it, especially based on stories like this and others, is that Jesus wants it to be full of people who can admit that they haven't arrived yet. My faith isn't perfect. It's not tight-knit. There are things that when they come to mind, like, yeah, I don't really know about that yet. Or here's something that God says is best for me, and I don't know if I agree with them yet on that. And it's just understanding we all have doubts. It's a church full of people with imperfect faith, but Momentum wants to move people forward to love God and love people and make disciples, apprentices of Jesus who make disciples. And I'd go so far as to say this: you can't grow without doubts. You can't grow without doubts. Like, you have to see them and notice where you have these imperfections and holes in your faith, and you have to address that for you to have spiritual growth. You can't grow without that. In fact, the most famous doubter in Christian history, in the history of the church, is one of the 9 who was at the bottom of that mountain. His name's Thomas, and we call him Doubting Thomas. All because when Jesus rose from the dead, physically, literally, after the crucifixion, 3 days later, some of the disciples saw him and were like, he's alive. And Thomas is like, whatever, man. Like, I will not believe that unless I actually touch his wounds from the cross and know that it's him risen. There's no way. And then eventually he did, and at the end of that episode of doubt, Thomas cries out to Jesus, my Lord and my God. And Jesus accepts that. So he's acknowledging in the most lofty confession of any human in all of Scripture, he looks at Jesus and says, my Lord and my God. And he says it to Jesus. And so his doubt ends with this beautiful, clear statement about, I know exactly who you are, and it leads to the greatest expression of belief. But the point is, you have to take doubts and you have to mobilize them. Like, this is a big deal because there's people who are just proud of the fact that they have imperfect faith and they doubt. It's like, yeah, I'm a doubter, I'm a skeptic, that's what I am. And they just want to shoot holes in things. They just want to live like a skeptic and never believe anything that's positive, a positive proposition of any kind of truth. They want to live like that. And those people are so annoying to have in a Mo group. I'm not asking because I really care. I just like to ask because I just want to create controversy. And that's so annoying. It's annoying in life. No one wants to be with a person like that, okay? It's just to say, I have doubts for the sake of having doubts. This is a repentant doubt this guy has. He has repentant doubts. Like, I want to believe. Like, I actually want to know God. I'm not just trying to throw up obstacles between me and God. But yeah, what about this? I have a repentant doubt system going on inside of me. And I want to be helped. Help me, Jesus. And so in Scripture, we definitely see that there are doubts that are, sinful and that lead to all kinds of bad things because of the doubts. But you also see in the flip side in Scripture that doubts can have a tremendous amount of positive energy in them. A tremendous amount if you mobilize them toward investigation, discussion, and action. Doubts have to be mobilized. Like, they're there to be looked at and figured out. Like, yeah, that's something I don't know yet. I sure should talk to somebody that's more mature than me spiritually to understand, how does Jesus factor into this question that I have? And so doubt's something that can lead us to a better understanding of Jesus the way it did for Thomas. And so at Momentum, in our Mo groups, we love to have people with doubts because we all have them, okay? Especially if they're repentant doubts of like, God, I want to turn this to you. I want to believe. I really do, but I'm not gonna until I have certain understanding, answers, whatever it is, but I want to believe. Help me. And so I say if you're someone in a Mo group, which they kick back off in a couple of weeks here, if you are someone that you would say, yeah, I have my doubts and I identify them, or there are people in that Mo group, you want to try to avoid two extremes. One is don't condemn them or let them condemn themselves, or if it's you, don't condemn yourself simply for having doubts, okay? That's not godly at all. I shouldn't doubt. I have to be a person of faith, or telling someone else, stop it. Don't question it. Just accept it. Those are not godly responses. You have to say, don't beat yourself up by the fact that you have doubts. Let's talk about those things, or let's do some research. Let's mobilize those doubts. In fact, there's an epic verse in Jude 22 in Scripture, written by the half-brother of Jesus, that says, be merciful to those who doubt. That's the Spirit of God to doubters, is be merciful to them. Not people who are just trying to create arguments for argument's sake, but be merciful to those who actually are doubting and struggling to believe. And then the other side of that is, okay, don't condemn them, don't let them condemn themselves. And the other side is encourage doubters not to be paralyzed and overwhelmed by their doubts. And that is this point of help them mobilize their doubts. Realize that it's not going to help if they just sit there in their doubts. They actually have to do some thinking, some discussing, some listening to stuff, some reading Scripture. Help them mobilize those doubts, because Satan can prey on doubts. He can absolutely prey on them. He can use doubts to breed sin and separation from him, and separation from God, and he can use it to push someone over the edge with their faith. So you have to mobilize your doubts. I think it's cool that there's a parallel to this story with the 12 disciples themselves. This idea of, I believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. The disciples, including Thomas, at one point say to Jesus in Luke 17:5, the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. Like, they understand our faith isn't giant, it isn't kicking butt. We've seen over and over our lack of faith as we've walked with you and you've done ministry. Increase our faith. And I just give you permission, steal this prayer. If you are someone who is struggling with specific doubts or in a season of doubt, steal this prayer. Steal it from the father of the boy that was demon-possessed. Lord, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. Help me. Give me what I need. Put the right people in my life. Help me to know what I need to read, who I need to talk to. And then this one, Lord, it's obvious that we do have some faith, but increase my faith, Lord. And he will show you in situations how there are some people who follow Jesus who maybe deal with really difficult situations in a way where they keep their eyes on Jesus. And you might see that and be like, wow, that certainly increases my faith to see how they dealt with that storm. There's all kinds of, you are going to enter bad situations in your life regardless of whether you pray this prayer, because a lot of times there are people with the mentality of, oh, don't pray for increased faith, or I might get sick, I might have this happen, stuff's going to happen regardless in this world. So ask God to increase your faith as storms hit you. Okay, the storms are coming, but ask God, will you increase my faith? So steal those prayers from those wise people. And if you really want to understand doubt, here is probably maybe the most important point in the story. If you really want to understand doubt and the story of the man with the boy who is demon-possessed, you have to realize that doubt is never just a matter of intellectual thinking, okay? It is never just a matter of, well, they're intellectuals, and because they're intellectuals, they doubt, or because they're intellectuals, they've worked out their doubts and they believe in Jesus. It's never an intellectual thing, period. This father in Mark chapter, 9, he had just experienced 9 disciples failing at helping his son. Think about what this father has been through. How long has it been since he's had a good night's sleep? The son has a demon in him who's trying to kill him, throw him in water to drown him, throw him in fire to burn him. How long has it been since he's had a good night's sleep? You ever had a sick kid that you're worried about and you can't sleep at night? I hear him coughing. Are they okay? Are they choking on their saliva? Whatever it is. You're freaking out. This guy has a demon-possessed son, and the demon's trying to kill him. He's so exhausted, and he shows up with the hope that maybe 9 disciples of Jesus can help, and they don't. His faith is badly shaken. This is not an intellectually spawned doubt that's happening right here. He is losing hope. And that's what the story is about. So this is so important. Doubt always masquerades as more intellectual than it really is. Doubt is also emotional, stemming from personal experience. Usually, when you hit a season of doubt, it is not hard to look and say, why am I here? It wasn't because I just got new facts. It wasn't just because I got some cold, hard truths that were told to me. It's because I'm going through something in my personal life, and now I'm like, man, that makes me really doubt. That makes me really doubt. It's personal experience. It's emotion. It's not intellectual only. You are not just a brain in a vat, okay? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a philosopher that came up with an idea about being a brain in a vat, and he actually uses that concept to actually disprove that theory itself, that we could just be brains in a vat. It's actually what the whole Matrix series is built on, by the way, is the idea that like nothing's real in this world. It's just brains being stimulated by stimuli, and we don't know that we're just brains in a vat, because some people believe some cool stuff like that, so have at it, people. But the idea is you're not just a brain in a vat. You have a life experience, which sometimes out of your emotion and out of your disappointment, as in this story, makes you real. It makes you start spinning, and you're like, is this even true? Is Jesus who he says? Does God even care? Is this the best way to live? And so doubt comes from your experiences in this awful, broken, fallen world. And so the dad's doubts are sparked by personal experience. It wasn't logic only. And that's part of why I bring this book up. Is one, because yes, there is stuff in here to help you attack doubts intellectually, but why did his story lead him to searching out atheism and wanting to embrace atheism? Because he went through a decade of disappointment. That's not a surprise, the timeline there. I go through a decade of disappointment. I give God 3 strikes because God is not responding to me the way I think he should when I'm serving him hard, okay? I'm giving you everything I got, God. I deserve to be blessed now. Well, that's just not the way it works in this world. God isn't a genie in a bottle that if we do the right things, we get all the good stuff, okay? Oh, all the candy just emptied out for me because I served like crazy and I got robbed twice and I gave everything I have to start a new church. Crap still happens. And he's like, God, you get 3 strikes and you know what? I'm done. It's a decade of disappointment. I need a new belief system. So he said, I wanted to embrace atheism. Why? He was discouraged and broken-hearted and reeling. And so after that decade, he started reading atheist authors. And he basically summarized 100 years of atheistic thinking by doing basically little book reports that are in this book on 4 major works from atheists that are famous. New York Times bestseller kind of stuff. And it's, wide range from the Enlightenment era with Nietzsche. He reviews a book by Nietzsche in here, to the more current modern leaders of the new atheists, which was really popular up till, I'd say maybe a decade ago, people like Richard Dawson. And he summarized 100 years of atheist arguments. And then after summarizing in a chapter, an atheist book, the next chapter, he gives his response to that atheist book. And then he does another atheist book, and he does 4 books total. And he said, I was astoundingly disappointed by what I read, he said. When atheists engage Christian apologists, people who defend the Christian faith, with rebuttals, they often merely attacked caricatures of their positions. Okay, so what he's saying is, if you're familiar with straw man fallacy, it's the idea of like, and this happens in politics, this happens in religion, any kind of argument. It's, I'm gonna summarize what you believe, but it's not really accurate about what you believe. It's called building a straw man, and then through arguments, I tear down your straw man. Well, you created that straw man to begin with. That's not what I actually believe, and that's typically what often happens with your atheist writers like a Richard Dawkins or even like Bill Maher, who I respect a lot of things he says, but when it comes to faith, I'm like, you're building up straw mans. That's not what I believe. And then you tear it down so intelligently. And so he's like, that's what they were doing in their books. They're setting up a straw man and then knocking down a straw man. Then he said, I found it intellectually unfulfilling. The arguments were so poor that the greatest authors of atheism did more than any Christian apologist to push me back toward faith in God. Hence the title, Thank God for Atheists. I wanted to embrace atheism. I was brokenhearted after a decade of disappointment. And when I read what atheists had to say, they didn't have anything to say about meaning or purpose or hope that made any sense. It was so dark and empty, and I found it intellectually unfulfilling. And one of the things he says, which I think is a helpful analogy to anyone right now who's like, but I'm not struggling with doubt right now. Sure, I probably have some, but they aren't holding me back. I'm fine. That's very true. It's very true. I have imperfect faith, but it's not stopping me from living my life for Jesus. One of the things he says is kind of like if you're married. He says, as an analogy, if you're married, it's better to have a strategy in the midst of your marriage and your relationship of investing in that relationship and keeping the fire alive. Basically, the idea that romance is found in pursuit of one another. We keep romance alive by pursuing one another. He said that's a way better strategy than trying to reignite the flame after you both are just completely done with each other. I can't stand you. I have contempt for you. Anytime you walk in a room, my heart sinks. Well, obviously, it's better to work on the marriage throughout the marriage to keep the fire alive than it is to reignite it when the flame has gone out, which can be done, but that's very, very difficult. There's way more work. He says the same thing is true with this, what we're talking about. This is what he says. The best time to tackle doubt is in the calm, not during the storm. Why? Because it's so emotional. Doubts are so emotional based on personal experience. So when you or someone you love gets sick, when you go through an awful divorce, when you get the news you never expected to get, whatever it is, all of a sudden your emotion tells you God doesn't love you, He doesn't care, He's not real. You were doing good things, He should have blessed you. And you don't have the stuff to fall back on because you weren't doing any of the work during the calm. So he says, tackle your doubts in the calm, not during the storm. Mobilize the doubts that you have. Why? Because, we're often overwhelmed with pain, grief, disappointment, anger, and then we aren't thinking clearly. I have a pastor friend one time who said he was talking to a guy that he knows well, so that's an important context. He knows this guy well, and the guy was like, I don't believe in God anymore. And my friend, who's a little bit of a straight shooter like me, was like, bull crap, you don't believe in God. You just met a Christian who was a butt crack. You had somebody in your life that was a butt, and now, because that Christian was a butt, you think you don't believe in God. This is your emotion talking. He's like, yeah, I guess the truth is. But that's the truth. It's like our emotion is often what drives our doubts. On the flip side of that, let me say this. I try to say this as often as I can in this topic. Doubt your doubts. Okay, it's not fair just to doubt your faith. You should doubt your doubts in the faith. Why? Well, the point is this. Sometimes if we're super honest, not only is it disappointment and discouragement like this father, sometimes the truth is we doubt because there's something we want that God says that's not good for you. Let's be really honest. Are we going to be really honest? A lot of times when we doubt, it's because, well, I want to do that. But God says, that's not smart. And you're like, I don't get why it's not smart. I think it will be good. And God's like, but I love you and I know better than you. And you're like, but I think it would be awesome. Man, I'm really doubting your love for me right now, God. I'm really doubting this whole thing because I want something. Psalm 73 is great with this. It's a very godly person named Asaph, and he says, I'm losing my foot. My footing, I'm about to stumble and fall like a mountain climber. I feel like I'm about to fall. I'm going to lose my faith. Then he says, why in verse 3? For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Oh, that's so honest. What's happening? It's like, I'm following God. They aren't, and it looks like there's no consequences. They're being blessed. They're getting promoted. They have someone to be with. They get all this stuff, and they're totally wicked. There's no consequences, and truth is, I kind of want that. I want to do what I want, not have consequences. And he's so honest in Psalm 73. And so this is a very important point. Doubt your doubts, because your motives are never pure when it comes to doubt. There are some honest doubts, but then there are some very dishonest doubts. I know a whole lot of people who suddenly didn't believe in Jesus because they wanted to do something that Jesus said, but that's not wise. It's not good for you. It's unhealthy. And I could sit up here all day and tell the stories, but regular season NFL starts in 2 weeks, so I'll wrap it up. And so, doubt your doubts. Ask yourself the question, why am I struggling right now? Why am I doubting right? Why do I suddenly not want to invest in people anymore as a leader right now? Why do I feel disconnected from the church right now? Why? And often it leads back to, there's a reason I'm doubting, and it's actually sometimes very selfish, or sometimes very emotional because I'm hurt or disappointed. Let me lead home with this point. Let me go back to the first point. Helplessness, not holiness, is the first step to accessing the presence and the power of Jesus. Just a quick breakdown. Jesus and Christianity versus every religion in the world. Every other religion in the world says, okay, I have lived a good life. Now, God, because of that, you bless me. That's the system of every religion in the world. I live a good life, therefore you have to bless me. That is not faith in Jesus. That's faith in yourself. I am so good, and that's the teachers of the law. I'm so good. You have to bless me. You have to bless me. I'm being a good person, God. That is every other religion. That is 100% not Christianity. And so that's not faith in Jesus. This boy's father says, I'm not faithful. I'm riddled with doubts. I cannot muster enough strength to meet my moral and spiritual challenges, but help me, Jesus. Help me. And it's an absolute difference between other religions is they say you give God a good record and God owes you blessing. That is every other religion. Christianity said God gives you at an infinite cost to himself a perfect record through Jesus Christ by grace because of your faith that you put in Jesus, and then you live gladly through him. You didn't do anything to deserve it. You just said, I admit I need help, and I'm willing to take your help, that you died for me on the cross and paid that price for me. So this is a man who says, I have imperfect faith, but help me. And Jesus is like, oh, I can work with that. You realize you're imperfect, you're not adequate, and you need help. I can work with that. And when you do that, my power is released into your life. Last week after church, I started getting phone calls that no one ever wants to get, and that was that someone at Momentum's house had caught on fire. And I was warming up some lunch, and I started getting calls from Momentum through Andre Frazier, our worship leader, to that family. It told him it was coming to me and the staff through Andre. Then I got a call from Twinsburg Police Department. As many of you know, I'm the chaplain for the police and fire in Twinsburg. So they call me. Someone at your church, their house is on fire. It's like, I'm on my way. A few weeks ago, I told the story about Christian and Donna Rao. Donna is the one who, back in her single days, was with a boyfriend, speeding through South Carolina with over $1,000 of illegal fireworks in her trunk. And she told the cop, please don't look in the trunk. Please. And then she went back to the cruiser, sat there and wet her pants. That's Donna. That's Donna right here. So Christian, she's now married to Christian, and they have kind of a multi-generational living situation in their home. So this is Lexi and her husband, Brody. They have an 8-month-old named Sammy, and they live in Christian and Donna's. This is Christian. They live in Christian and Donna's basement, and this is Sammy. He's 8 months now, but they have kind of an apartment down there. It's a sweet setup as their home is being built for them. They live there temporarily. Well, last week after church, Christian was out doing some yard work. He was the only adult home. He was in the backyard with him and Donna, a couple of their kids. And Sammy, the baby, was sleeping in the basement taking a nap. And all of a sudden, he saw smoke and fire coming out of the basement window and just scared him to death. He ran into the house. Actually, their son, Braden, who's 11, called 911, made the call. Christian eventually was yelling on speakerphone to them to let them know the situation. But he said, when I went to go in the basement, the smoke was so thick and black from plastic burning that I could turn my light on my phone in front of my face and I couldn't see the light. I went down 4 steps. I couldn't see anything. And he used to be a firefighter. This is a dude, okay? He used to be a firefighter in Angola, Indiana, and he went down 4 steps, and he said, I know how this ends. I go down there, and then I eventually have to take a breath, and I end up on that floor, and they're looking for me too. I can't do anything. He kept trying. And can you imagine how that feels? Your grandson is in the basement, and you can't do anything about it. Eventually, 3 of my buddies, this is so weird, 2 worlds colliding for me, because everybody showing up to help are my friends. Everybody needing help is my friends. So 3 Twinsburg police officers show up, and they're dudes, man. One of them's Jeremy Vecchio, who's like freaking this tall. And they get to the top of the stairs, and they want to go down too, and they just can't. They try using wet towels. They're trying all kinds. They can't do it without equipment. They cannot go in the basement. Christian said it actually helped me to see these 3 studs. They couldn't get down there, and they were trying. And I was like, I know I can't go down there. I used to be a firefighter. It took just over 8 minutes from the call for the fire department to show up, people in gear already that they were putting on the way over. And crazy enough, I mean, of course, that felt like 30 minutes to everyone waiting, because there's a baby down there, and there's no noise. There's nothing, and it's just gut-wrenching. And then another friend of mine named Josh Jarzab, fully in his equipment, along with another guy, go down into the basement, and he said he eventually, in the pure darkness, found like a baby latch in a door, and he knew he'd found the room. And when he opened the door, he went in, and there's no smoke in the room because the door was closed while the baby was napping. So he closed the door behind him. He's got the mask on and everything. He scoops up the baby. He takes one quick breath, like, here we go. And he opens the door, and he heads out through the basement, up the stairs. And this is Josh coming out holding 8-month-old Sammy in his arms. Here's Sergeant Quinn, who I actually told you about a few months ago, went into full cardiac arrest in February. He's back on duty, and he yells, he's got the baby, he's got the baby. And Josh runs out holding baby Sammy after saying, it's a crazy, crazy story. In fact, cool part is I went up to Josh afterward, and I put my arm around. I was like, dude, Christian is so thankful, but he can't even speak to you right now. I mean, he is so thankful. He felt so helpless, and Josh flipped over his helmet. Josh happens to follow Jesus. He flipped over his helmet. He said, look what I just had printed on the inside of my firefighter helmet. It's Isaiah 6:8, and it says on his helmet, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. He said, I went into that basement knowing there was a baby in there, and I was not coming out until I found a baby, or I was not coming out. And so, Christian, I just can't imagine how he feels, but there's nothing he could have done. He's going to struggle with that for a while, I'm sure. God bless you, Christian. You're going to struggle with that, but there's nothing you could have done. And here's the deal. He said, I've never felt so helpless. He told me that. But that's the deal. That's when help comes, right? Like, I've never felt so helpless, but I asked for it. I asked for help. If we say we need it, if we say we need a Savior, then help comes. When the helpless cry out to Jesus for help, help comes. Lord, I do believe, but help me. Help me. And so if you're in a situation where you don't follow Jesus yet, cry out to Jesus. Call Jesus. Put your faith in him. Turn to him. Be baptized into Christ and surrender your whole life to him and get the help that you need spiritually. Let's pray.